Hello and welcome. You are watching The Interview. I am Molly Gambhir and I have with me a very special guest, someone who needs no introduction, Richard Gere. Thank you for being here. Welcome to WION World is One.
Yeah, hi, Molly.
We're going to start off by talking about your journey. Tell us more about what drew you towards Buddhism and advocating for Tibetan culture and human rights.
Well, I think any philosophical, spiritual journey begins with probably two issues. One, kind of a curiosity about the world and a curiosity about our own minds. But I think also there's no point doing the deep work on your mind unless you're in some state of suffering. And certainly Buddhism engages that question. And as a young man, I was feeling what I call the dissonance of life, that what we are told, the conceptual frameworks of our world and our emotional world, and even like what we are, who am I? What is this all about? Is that my internal experience of that, my innate experience of that was not fitting the external description. And so I explored different ways of looking at my mind, at the universe, at the world of emotions, the world of suffering. And Buddhism was something that really touched me quite deeply. And I felt initially a very strong attraction to Zen Buddhism. So my first engagement with Buddhism was through Zen, through the Japanese form of Buddhism. And I quite loved that. And it brought me a habitual daily practice, which I've maintained now for over 50 years. I had a very strong desire to meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama when I was around 30. And I didn't know too much about him at that point, and there was very little that was known outside of Asia about him. And there were very few books at that point. And I'm not quite sure where that drive came from, but turns out we had a mutual friend. I had an introduction, and during a monsoon in 1981 or 82, I keep forgetting, I made my way to Dharamsala, which was not easy at that point. I think we had to take an overnight train from Delhi to Pathankot, and then another car to Dharamsala, which I think was about a 6-hour drive at that point. And it was monsoon and there was no place to stay, but I eventually ended up staying with the Dalai Lama's younger brother, Nari Rinpoche, who was quite extraordinary, and his wife, Rinchen Kandrila. And they kind of took care of me and introduced me to the Tibetan community. And eventually I was able to have an audience with His Holiness, and I just continued from there. I think it wasn't like a light bulb going off in me, but it was quite a natural, comfortable state, as if I had already been there for many lifetimes.
Can you elaborate on your role in the international campaign for Tibet and your efforts to promote Tibetan culture and human rights?
Yeah, well, I started when it was in 1987, I think it was, that me and Professor Robert Thurman started Tibet House in New York. And, we wanted to create a cultural entity which had a very large door for people to come through to engage Tibetan culture and engage the political situation. When I first met His Holiness, I really didn't know the political situation in Tibet. I didn't know the diaspora. I really didn't know the human rights abuses. I didn't know the 1.2 million Tibetans who had lost their lives as a result of the Chinese invasion and occupation. So we wanted to engage all of those things. that's when I became involved in around 1991 with the International Campaign for Tibet. And then I joined the board, and then very soon after that became chairman of the board. But a lot of this is really lobbying, talking to people all over the world. We've been very successful in Washington over these many, many years, decades now. And we were able to, in 2002, get signed into law the Tibetan Policy Act, which creates a lane for, within the State Department, that Tibet has to be engaged. And in any talks with the Chinese, Tibet has to be brought up. Now, we've expanded on this over the years, and that Policy Act states that the Chinese version of the history of Tibet and Asia is false. And no matter how many times they say it over and over again, it's still false. It's an illegitimate occupation. It's never had an agreement with the Tibetan people themselves. And we've been engaging this around the world, these issues. And from my own side, we've been extraordinary in our ability to have Republicans, Democrats, all political sides, very much on the side of the Tibetan people in this crisis. This has gone on for decades now. I really want to do more work. We have offices in Europe, but I want to bring Europe up to speed with what we've done in Washington.
I'm curious to know, tell us more about your first meeting with the Dalai Lama and how he inspires you.
The survival of Tibetan culture would be in question if it wasn't for India. The Indian government, the Indian people have been incredible hosts to the Tibetans in exile. And I have no doubt they wouldn't have survived or succeeded without the help of the Indian people. So I really want to thank you all for that. When I was had first come to India and went up to Dharamsala, I think I had some vague vision of possibility that, of course, the Dalai Lama was going to wave his hand over my head and I would achieve enlightenment and all of my suffering be dissolved and I would be living in my own nirvana. And of course, that was kind of foolish. And when I was able to meet His Holiness for the first time, I was struck really by how simple and normal he was. And by that, I mean, of course, wise, but kind and generous and very normal. We just had a normal conversation. And he's very skillful. I mean, he meets people all the time. His own motivation is completely to help other people, other beings. And you can feel that in his presence, that he's there for you. And not in a foolish way, but in a very skillful way. And he was very skillful with me. He was there with his brother, and I don't think His Holiness had any idea who I was. But he was talking to his brother, who was in the room also, and his brother told him that I was an actor and probably that I was a well-known person and blah, blah, blah. And he started asking me questions about acting. And I didn't particularly want to talk about acting. I want to talk about transcendence and emptiness and maybe profound Buddhist subjects. But it was his way to get into me on a deeper level of using who I am. What is my job? And we started talking about emotions. And he said, look, when you're acting and you're angry, are you really angry? And when you're laughing and amused, are you really laughing and amused? And when you're crying, are you really crying? Are these emotions real? And I kind of threw me back and I said, yeah, I mean, it's the more realistic, the more you're really feeling it, the more powerful the portrayal of the character is in the storytelling. And he looked at me very deeply, silently, and he just started laughing. And it was, for me, a very profound moment that I remember in minute details. What he was communicating to me was I was manufacturing emotions as an actor. As real and powerful as they feel in the moment, I'm manufacturing them. It's my job. We do the same thing, all of us in life, is that we manufacture these emotions of sadness and joy, jealousy, envy. All of these emotions are imagined and play acted.
What are your thoughts on the Dalai Lama's legacy and his potential succession, considering China's attempts to influence the process?
The ancient and traditional way of Dalai Lamas being recognized as the Dalai Lama are codified clearly within the culture. And this Dalai Lama has said that he's going to be found by the ancient ways, which includes divinations. It includes signs that he will leave at the time. It will, as he has stated on his birthday, when I was there was a proclamation the day before his birthday that, again, he would not be reborn in a Chinese-controlled area if it was not free. He would be born in a free place, and he would be born with the traditional signs and guardrails. And the Ganden Photang, which is the close people around him, would be empowered to decide who is the next incarnation when he's discovered as a boy. I think more important than that, because of course the Dalai Lama is a bodhisattva, he's going to come back no matter what. His mission in being is to help other beings. So over the last 10, 15 years, people have been begging him within the Tibetan culture and outside of Tibetan culture to continue. So he was able to say at the time of this 90th birthday that he's heard from people, and it's become clear that the institution is still desired and wanted by the Tibetan people, so he would continue. So he will come back as the Dalai Lama, and that institution will be there to help people going forward. But this is completely up to the Tibetan people. It has nothing to do with the Chinese. And of course, the Chinese are planning to have their Dalai Lama, as they abducted the real Panchen Lama as a young boy and have installed their version, the fake Panchen Lama.
In your view, how can the international community help ensure the preservation of Tibetan culture and the Dalai Lama's legacy? What are your expectations from the international community?
India has a very complicated relationship with China, and certainly is an honest broker, but an involved broker in Asia, and has been incredibly supportive and kind, not only to the Dalai Lama, the Tibetan people. But I see that the strongest fulcrum against China is the US and Europe coming together in one voice. China has been very successful of separating each country and punishing them essentially into submission over economics. So if the US and Europe come together in one voice, and an honest voice, and a clear and strong melody of responsibility, which includes human rights, which includes the rule of law, and all those things that we seem to care about deeply, all of us, then the Chinese will listen. But it has to be a unified voice speaking to them.
Tell us more about the measures that you have taken for the preservation of Tibetan culture and human rights as inspired by the Dalai Lama's teachings.
Well, I'm deeply proud of being able to help publish books of important Buddhist books that I've been able to sponsor. I look back at all the things that I have done to support His Holiness and the Tibetan people. I think that's one of the things I'm most proud of. But certainly Tibet House, which spawned other Tibet houses around the world, was very important. This work with ICT is very important. The offices in Berlin, Amsterdam, Brussels, as well as Washington. My voice, probably because of my deep concern for His Holiness and for Tibetan culture, I've gone out on a limb probably more than most people have or will or could. But I'm really pleased that I can use my voice on their behalf and highlight the human rights abuses, highlight the reality of what's going on. Much of what ICT does is give truth through our own research and our own sources of information to the world, because Tibet is completely locked up right now. My journalist friends, it's much easier to get into North Korea than it is to get into Tibet and report on what's going there. So this is a martial state. This is a place where essentially the Tibetan population is continually to be abused.
Right. You mentioned you've gone out on a limb while undertaking those efforts. What challenges then have you faced in your film career while advocating for Tibetan culture and human rights?
Oh, I don't think there's been any issue with that from my side. And if there is, I don't even pay any attention to it. So it's irrelevant to me.
In what ways has your relationship with the Dalai Lama influenced your views on global politics, economics, social justice?
From the Buddhist point of view, the most important thing is motivation. Is why do we do what we do? And that's probably the only thing that can mitigate any kind of karmic residue of our actions, is if our motivation was pure. And certainly that's something in His Holiness the Dalai Lama that one can never question. It is so pure from the moment he wakes up in the morning. First thought is, how can I help people today? How can I help all beings today? In what way can I further the happiness of others? So when you're around someone as courageous as that and is so committed to that point of view of one working with his own depth of understanding of the concept of emptiness, empty of inherent existence, his own being, his own self, empty of inherent existence. But the experience we have around us is, in essence, empty of inherent existence. Impermanence is a reality. When you're around that, obviously, it's something that it saturates you, saturates your mind, saturates your being in the most wonderful and powerful way. I think it increases courage.
Speaking of which, how has your friendship with the Dalai Lama then impacted your personal life and relationships?
Well, I have many different kinds of relationships with His Holiness. Some of them I'm still trying to figure out. I'm a student. Number one, I'm a student and will always be a student. But also we plan things together. We've sponsored things around the world together. The sponsored talks by His Holiness all around the world. And certainly politically, we have talked about the situation and how to rectify it. But we have a personal relationship too. I talk to His Holiness about personal problems. None of us want to take too much time from His Holiness. One of these wonderful things that came out of his birthday celebration, I think it was just a week ago in Dharamsala, after His Holiness had made the proclamation that he will, in fact, continue the Dalai Lama institution and gave more indication of how his rebirth would emerge and his new incarnation would emerge and be found. There was a discussion of all the High Lamas, and so many of the speakers were saying, we have to understand now that this Dalai Lama doesn't just belong to Tibet. This Dalai Lama belongs to the world. And with a sense of humility and a sense of pride, this extraordinary man came out of Tibetan culture. But his influence is way beyond just Tibet. His influence is universal. And again, the purity of his motivation and the strength and ability of his skill to help situations, to help specific people, but help countries, to help world politics. This is the messenger of peace. And that's not an easy thing. And it's not for the faint of heart. But he's been able to carry this position for 90 years now, and it continues. This influence is way beyond Tibet.
Can you share any personal anecdotes or experiences that you've had while learning from the Dalai Lama that have had a profound impact on you? Would be hard to choose, I'm guessing.
Now, there have been so many profound moments. I mean, the first one comes to me was in Dharamsala, in Bodh many, many years ago. And he was giving a teaching. He used to do yearly teachings where hundreds of thousands of people would show up in Bodh Gaya, in the place of the Buddha Shakyamuni's enlightenment, in the amazing stupa there. And His Holiness was giving a broad teaching, and he was engaging the subject of bodhicitta and the mind of enlightenment, or the mind to enlightenment. And as soon as he said the word bodhicitta, he started to weep. And there were hundreds of thousands of us there. We held our breath, and he wiped his eyes. He stuck out his tongue, and he touched his tongue, and he said, "I'm so happy I have a tongue that I can talk about bodhicitta." And the warmth coming from him fed us all, hundreds of thousands of people in that moment. The depth of his heart of enlightenment, of his deep compassion and love and simple kindness that he was giving us in many different ways. He had many different ways of talking about it with words, but the depth of his own emotions and his own achievements of becoming love and compassion, and praising his own tongue that he could even talk about bodhicitta.
In your view, what are the important values or lessons that the rest of the world can learn from the Dalai Lama and Tibetan culture?
What can the rest of the world learn?
Yes, the important lessons and values.
Well, His Holiness distills things. I was just reading something. Actually, it was something that Albert Einstein said. He said, look, when something is profound and said simply, that's God talking. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama is able to communicate extremely complicated things very simply. They say that, Jesus Christ was able to talk to children or fishermen as well as high priests and communicate the depth of his understanding. I think the Dalai Lama has that, is that he's able to say things so simply, clearly, that it goes directly to your heart. he said many times, look, I'm a simple monk. He said, people ask him, what's your religion? He said, my religion is kindness. My religion is kindness. My religion is a warm heart. I mean, it's profound how you get there to embody kindness and a warm heart. But that's the basis of a religion, is being kind and loving. And acting, he's often said, prayer is important, but it's doubtful how much prayer actually changes the world. If you want to change the world, you have to act. But you act from wisdom, you act from compassion, you act from a pure motivation, but you act. So I think that's another important part of His Holiness, that kindness, that warm heart, that wisdom is active in the world.
Wow, I think that's actually a wonderful way to wrap this up. And I have to ask you before we end if there's anything that you would like to add.
No, it's a profound subject. Obviously, you could go on about His Holiness forever. But one, again, I think I would emphasize that how kind not only the Indian government, but Indian people have been to the Tibetans, who have found a safe haven in a storm. And they've been a safe haven now for 60 years. They would not have survived without the kindness and the compassion, the empathy of Indian people. So I really want to thank you all for that, and how important that is to the world, that this embodiment of Tibetan culture, which was locked away in the Himalayas for 1,500 years, has made its way into the world, but through the portal of India. It never would have happened otherwise. And beyond that, this Tibetan culture was born out of Indian culture. His Holiness is a child of Nalanda, the greatest university of its time, maybe the greatest university of all times. But Tibetan form of Buddhism and the culture that arose out of that came from Nalanda, came from India. So thank you all for that.
Well, that's a wonderful way to wrap this up. Thank you so much once again. And I'm sure our viewers would love to hear all of your views. Thank you very much.
Thank you.